I heard this really cool song yesterday by Antsy McLean. Has anyone ever heard of Antsy McLean? I never had, but he's one of those kind of red dirt redneck singers. And it was a song about, I've lost it now. I had one of those little Chinese fortune cookie things in my pocket. It wasn't about Chinese fortune cookies. It was a song about the inspected by little tag. Have you ever reached in your pocket and pulled one of those out, a brand new pair of pants, inspected by? I think his was like number 379, and in the song he had Inspector 379 carrying on with 378 other people while they inspected his new pair of jeans. Isn't that great? You like that? Pull it right out of your pocket, and somebody has taken the time to carefully examine these pants before you put them on so that you could trust that they were going to be all right, that they're going to be quality workmanship. It was a great way to start a sermon. I can't remember why for the life of me I said any of that. So, if you're not reading the newsletter, then I'm not ashamed of myself. If you are reading the newsletter, then I'm terribly ashamed of myself because I can't seem to turn my stuff in on time and to get it out on time. But if you're in leadership and you're not writing for the newsletter, you can't really scold me. So, as late as it is, this was an important thing. The disciples of Christ began with people who like to write periodicals, newsletters, things like that. As the new country was expanding across the Mississippi River and into new territory, this is how disciples stayed in touch with one another. This is how we planted one church and not 1,000 and even 5,000 individual churches. But reading and writing and staying in touch through this media is so important. And so one of the things that I've done this year in the newsletter, there's a nice little color picture of a book cover here on the front. So this is kind of go along with the Seriously Amateur Theologians Book Club. But someone asked me this year if I would share with you some of the books that I've read and how they affected me in my own spiritual journey and in my own spiritual formation. So I've agreed once a month to share a book with you. I'll put the cover on here. That's what the whole article's about. I'm reading it to you now. And I'll put the cover on here because we do color on the front page. And then on the inside, there will be a little filler box in here that says Pastor Doug's Book Review. And I'll offer you some comments and some things about the book if you're interested in it. And I'll do this for 12 books, one a month for each month of the year. I hope that you'll follow that. Now, I mention that to you today because one of the books that I'm going to talk to you about as the year goes on is this little book here, but I'm not going to do it in the first month or the second month or even the fifth or the sixth month. I'm going to wait a little while. Even though I have said that I believe, just me, I'm entitled to my opinion, that I think this might be the most important book that has been written in the last 100 years. Because it deals with a topic that no one is addressing in our culture. And that is maturity, eldership, second half of life spirituality. The statement the book makes is that most congregations and most of our religion in the Western world deals with only the first half of life spirituality. But when we pass that midlife thing, whatever that thing is that happens to us, and it's not at a particular age, it's different in all people, but somewhere around what we might call the middle part of our life, there's this, what Richard calls excitement that happens. Some call it crisis. Sometimes it may turn into crisis. But we all cross a threshold in our own formation where the things that used to answer our questions don't even address the right questions any longer. And how do we deal with it? And unfortunately, as Richard says, most of our spiritual and religious institutions simply try to teach us how to prop up the first half of life again and keep going, and that won't get it done. We have a lot of immature adults. I would be the first one to confess that. So I thought to help you with this today, we would take a little trip through movie land. Really, it's a history lesson, but if I say history, you're going to go to sleep. So we'll call it movie land. It works like this. Think about in the history of the world what you've learned. There were these great empires that just kept rising up. Remember, there were the Babylonians. You see. And then there were the Persians. And then there was like the Greek Empire. Remember Alexander the Great? Alexander the Great was called Alexander the Great because this one movement, politically, religiously, scientifically, in every way, this one movement out of Greece, about 600 or 700 years, maybe 300 years before Christ, this was the biggest thing going. And we owe a lot of our philosophy and a lot of our culture and a lot of our science and mathematics to that culture today than we realize. We owe a lot of our religion to that culture because a lot of the Bible was either an argument against Greek thought or it was Greek thinkers like the Apostle Paul who were trying to rationalize within their own culture what Jesus' message had meant. But it's terribly important. Then following the Greeks were the Romans, and the Romans, it's called the Greco-Roman Empire. Are you catching up with me here? It was very Greek influenced, and the Romans controlled a lot of the world. Then there were the Mongols with Genghis Khan, and I don't know how much of the world that they managed to occupy, but they sure learned how to make noodles and stir fry stuff real good. That's why they were. If you eat there too, that's why they won, because they ate well, right? And so I want you to follow this. Listen what happens. There are these people, the people of God. These are the descendants of Abraham. This is simple. This is not history. This is, Grandpa, where did we come from? And Grandpa says, well, we had this ancestor. His name was Abraham. And he finally heard God say something that no one else could hear God say. And God said, you're special. You have this faith that has set you apart, and you're going to be my special people because I'm going to choose you in front of everyone else so that the whole world will know that you're chosen and that they are chosen. And so the people of Abraham begin to grow and to mount up. And you know the stories. They find themselves in slavery in Egypt, the first great empire that they encounter. And then God leads them out of slavery, and they live in abundance in this land of Canaan for a number of years. And then something happens. There's another empire building up over in the east. There's this Babylonian empire and this king named Nebuchadnezzar, and he's starting to take over more and more and more of the world, and he decides he wants a little piece of the Middle East and Jerusalem, and they can sense he's coming. I love what my Old Testament professor told me, that the Babylonians surrounded Jerusalem, and they held its siege for 2 years. In other words, nothing goes in, nothing leaves for 2 years. Pretty soon you run out of bread and you run out of clean water, and it gets tough. And for Jeremiah to walk out and look over the city gates and to declare as a prophet to the people, and Jeremiah's message was simple: they're about to come take us away. They're about to come get us. And Dr. Craven would say that wasn't hard. That wasn't difficult prophecy. When you looked over the wall and you saw the enormity of the Babylonian army, you knew what was happening next. Some things are just unavoidable, easy to predict. And so sure enough, some of the people are hauled away. And as they're leaving, Jeremiah's crying out, when you get to Babylon, buy land, send your kids to school, get jobs, be good Babylonian citizens, because that's how they would be able to survive. And they make it for like some 70 years. But in a certain year, while they are in captivity and they are becoming Babylonian citizens, something else is happening. Don't you know it? There's always another empire building up, right? Always another empire. And so the Persians are beginning to build up arms, and they're beginning to train, and they're rising up, and they're creating this army, and everybody knows what's about to happen. And sure enough, it happens. The Persians come in, and they smash the Babylonians. And they inherit everything that Babylon has to offer, including all of these weird people that they had transported from Judea into Babylon. They've got all of these countercultural, subculture, slave people, half-breed people, some of them sticking to their own culture, their own diet, their own religion, marrying their own kind. And so Darius is a much smarter king than Nebuchadnezzar in some respects, because Darius has a different way of dealing with his captives. While Nebuchadnezzar sought to completely control you, Darius had the idea that if I send these people back to live among their folks, and I allow them to rebuild their great city and their great temple and their own religion, then they will see me as a friend. And sure enough, it works. It works. And so, the king of the Persian Empire builds this cast of characters that you hear from today. There is Nehemiah, the politician, who will go back to Jerusalem and help govern. And his job will be to help build the wall around the city and to put the city back into its civic order again. And alongside Nehemiah is the prophet Ezra. Ezra is the great preacher, the great priest who will guide the people ethically, morally, and religiously and spiritually through this great rebuilding. And so they equip them with money and manpower, and they send folks back to Jerusalem to rebuild. Now, these were a people who had told their stories over and over to their children, orally talking to them about the Torah and what God requires of us. Who are we, Grandpa? How did we get to be these people? What does God want from us? And they would tell them over and over. But now that they are returning from this horrible 70-year experience, it would be important to write down the things that they had been saying for so many years. And so now emerges the written tradition, the books that you read in the Old Testament, the works of prophets, the books of poetry, and especially those books of history, those books of law. The first 5 are being written down by a handful of authors with the help of all of the people in editing and in living out. Did you know that a lot of it is compiled by living it and saying, oops, this doesn't seem to be working. And here's what happens. When you have been God's chosen people, when you have been God's chosen people and God has lived among you and the presence of God has dwelt with you and you have lived under that protection and you found yourselves defeated and carried away and living in slavery, you have some questions. What happened? Why did God abandon us? Why did God turn God's back on us? How did we fall from God's protection and from God's favor? And whatever we did, we had better make sure that we do not do that again. And out of that comes a great period of fundamentalism, of getting back, not a nasty word, but a great period of getting back to what is it that we should be doing? What should we remember? Let's go over those big 10 things again. Thou shalt not this and that. And let's go over the laws of loving our neighbor and loving God. And it was a time to get back to that. Did you know that something like that happened in the United States? That we live in, what do they call this area through the South? The Bible Belt, thank you. And do you know how the Bible Belt was created? It was created as the Civil War came to an end. There was no reason why the North could defeat the South. We had the better marksmen, if we are the South, excuse me. This is the way you would think. If the South had the better marksman and it had the advantage of home field turf, if we had the numbers in our favor, how could those lily-livered Yankee boys come down here and defeat our boys? We had God on our side because, after all, the North, the South would tell you, was trying to take away freedom, and God is all about freedom. You see, only 6 or 8% of the South were probably actually slaveholders. It was a war about freedom to the person who never owned a slave. It was absolutely a war to free people. But there were people in the South who were saying what you might say today: if they come for my slave, if I let them take this man's slave, when will they come for my wagon, my farm, my gun, my possessions? Do you see how paranoid people get? And then, all of a sudden, they're beat. And the question is, what did we do? What did we do that God allowed us to lose this battle when God was clearly on our side? And whatever we did, we will make sure that never happens again. And so thus we go back to reviewing the rules, until we find ourselves ensconced in making the rules actually our God. Now, if you studied ancient, before there was a horoscope, before there was what do they call astrology? Is that what the horoscope is? Not astronomy? I'm getting old. If you study all these, there's some ancient forms like Kabbalah and Enneagram, and some of those things would suggest this, that in the development of our psyche and who we are, there is the same thing that happens. Somewhere in our young development, something happens to us, and we say, that will never happen again. And then we start to become the person that we're going to be, the adult that we're going to be. We start to develop everything, our gifts and our dysfunctions, just alike, that we're going to pass on to others. Here's my cog thing again. I like it like you got these cogs floating around, and it's who you're going to be, and then something happens, and click, something happens. Who knows what it may be? It's not always abuse. It's sometimes just your situation. It happens, they say, to middle children who suddenly realize, well, I'm just sort of insignificant. I'm not the older one. I'm not the younger one. But whatever it is, we decide this won't happen again. And then we get locked into this fundamental life of learning what it is I need to do to protect me, to sustain me. I laugh sometimes at my wife, who says, do you think I'm silly? Because she reads about all these other types of religion. And I say, I don't think you're silly at all. I think they're very valid. And the more I read, I think they're teaching me how to be me. How to be me. You got to build this up. You got to be better me. And I think it's important. I think Jesus would say, read all of it. Because just at the point when you're about the best me you think you can be, that's when Jesus comes along going, now this is what I want you to give away. But until you knew who it was, you didn't have it to give away. You understand that? Or what they would say is that in your early part of your adulthood, you're building your ego. You're getting your career, you're finding your spouse, you're even beginning to start to raise your family and pass your own values and priorities on to your children. And it's important to have a very good ego, because you're going to need it in the second half of your life to die to. Nothing is worse than someone who comes to the second half of life with no self-confidence, no self-esteem, and no decent ego to die to. And if you have too much ego, well, you could be in trouble. And if you have too little ego, you could be in even more trouble. But the person that has a good, solid ego has enough confidence in themselves to finally surrender, perhaps after much struggling and much warring against it. But sooner or later, we have to just take a deep breath and say, oh, I really can't fix it. I really can't explain it. And I really can't control it. And then we have to give ourselves to it. Nobody's getting you ready for that. Nobody. Nobody. All they're telling you is hang on to what you had in the early part of your life. Keep propping it up. Stick to what you know and what you know. I like when I was a kid, if you died tonight, do you know where you'd be tomorrow? And I'd be like, at Smith's Mortuary, because they had my grandpa and they had my grandma, and I'm pretty sure they've got their sights on me. You know what they mean, and you know what I mean. There's this certainty that's important. And here's what Richard would say. In the first half of life, it's ever important. It shocked me when he said, the reason we don't put the Beatitudes in the courthouse, but we put the Ten Commandments in the courthouse is because the courthouse is the place for the Ten Commandments. Ten Commandments are for the first half of life. When you need help with the thou shalt not, here's what you better know. This will not help you. This will not help you. This will harm you. This will hurt you. And you have to get that, as negative as it is, and you have to build healthy boundaries. In our generation, are y'all listening to me? I'm not talking to the folks that have taught me. I'm talking to y'all who have learned alongside me. I'm not talking to you folks who are the Great Depression generation and the World War II generation, and we love you, and we're glad you're here, and we need to hear from you. Don't stop talking to us. But the rest of you, listen to me. We did not get healthy boundaries. We didn't get it. And don't be mad anymore at your dad over that. Stop it, okay? Because we are a generation of people who have been poorly parented, and our parents did not have a choice in that, okay? So stop it. Let it go. And then we need to start now relearning what those healthy boundaries are. Because there's a time to tear the boundaries down. There is a time to say to the children in the congregation, you can dance in the aisles. There is a time to say to them, you can dance with no dignity, you can undignified. You can throw it all before God no matter who is watching. There's a time to say to those kids that this table is not magical or mystical. It is not unapproachable. It is not, you're not going to die if you touch it. There is a time to let it happen, and there is a time to reel them back in and say, at the same time, there's something magical and mystical about this table. And if the candle falls on you, it'll hurt. There's a time to say you should sing at the top of your lungs, and there is a time to say, now we're quiet. Boy, how times have changed. If I showed my little hiney, is that a good way to say that, in the middle of Kmart, you know what my dad would have done to me? And I do it now, and it's not appropriate. Because it's not appropriate anymore. Time to stop that. But it's time to say, I need to talk to this child. I need to rein this person in. And you know what people did? When my dad came down on me, they said, that's good, it's working. You know, when you hear a child squeal in worship, does your mind wander? Does it interrupt you in the middle of prayer? Or can you say to yourself, there, somewhere in this room is a parent who is guiding and building healthy boundaries for a child right now. Right now. And it's not all about how we treat our kids, but it's about us. We need those healthy boundaries because there's going to come a day and a time, and many of us are there now. We're facing it right now when just simply following the rules won't sustain us. As Richard says, as Dr. Craven says, and as so many say, there's a time when you're going to be called upon to break the rules. And I pray that you will be solid enough in the rules and have healthy enough boundaries in your life that you will have the wisdom and the courage to know what to do and to do it. Nobody is getting you ready for this. So here's how it ends, right? This is the end of my sermon, right here. Somebody's getting you ready. And it looks like this. there's this day that Jesus walks into this temple, and it's in Nazareth. It's in his own hometown, and everybody there knows him, and they're going, oh, here comes Josh again. You know, that's what Jesus means, right? Joshua. So here comes Josh, and he's the local guy, and his mom's got 4 other kids, and they don't act right when they're in the church either, but that's okay. And Jesus is 33, and he gets up, and he unrolls this scroll that they've heard read so many times, and he can do it because he can do something a lot of them can't do. He can read. He has an education. And he unrolls it, and he reads, and he says that there is a day that God is coming to proclaim sight to the blind, release to the captives. All of those who are oppressed are going to be free because God is going to be here to proclaim that the day and the year of God is here now. And Jesus says today, it's happening right here in your hearing. And they all get upset. But that's what you need to hear. Who do you know that needs to hear that? Isn't that you? Don't you want to hear that? That you are not oppressed? Here it is again. Oh, click. That'll never happen to me again. And you become empowered, and you become driven, and you become focused, and you become oppressed, and you become blind. You get so sure that what you know is true that you can't even see real truth when it's in front of you, and you get imprisoned. You fight so hard for your freedom that you end up imprisoning yourself in the fight itself, and you don't even know it until you're just sure God must be angry. And then Jesus comes along, and Jesus says, if you had a pocket, because God didn't create pockets, but if you had a pocket and you could reach in it, you would pull out this little slip of paper, and it would say, inspected by number 1, the big cheese, your pop, the big guy in the sky, Mother God, Father God, the mountain, the rock, the eagle, the bear, however you want to say. You could pull out of the pocket of your flesh somewhere, you'd find this little tag that says, you are mine, and I am not upset with you. And if I had to boil Jesus' entire ministry down to one thing, it would be that. It would be that. But you can't do this for yourself. You can't do this for yourself. It feels blasphemous to read the scripture and say, wow, I am God. I am just like God. I am a small God. I am perfect. I am whole. It's easier and more truthful most of the time to say I'm broken, I'm misguided, I'm self-centered, I'm a sinner because it's true. And at the same time, if someone else dare to proclaim it, here is the truth. You are sons and daughters of God. You are perfect. You are created just like in that image, made for glory alongside God. And somebody has to come along and tell you that. You can't do it for yourself. So, Jesus did it for you. And today, I'm doing it for you. And now here's what I want you to do with it. When you get out of here, you got to know this. You can't do it for yourself. And if you can't do it for yourself, you have a whole bunch of friends, constituents, and people out there in the world that can't do it for themselves either. This is your job. There's a lot of sin out there that needs to be forgiven. There's a lot of wounds out there that need to be healed. There's a lot of misinformation out there that needs to be done away with in one word. And that word is, if you could reach in your pocket, do you know what you'd find? This little tag that said, you belong to God. It's really that simple. And from that day forward, you get to respond to that. Now, I hope that challenges you today.